Hey, everybody. Thank you again for having me, and thank you for visiting, everyone. Excited to be here and share with you everything you ever wanted to know about Cobra and more. The day is going to be split up a little bit, so I've got a presentation first, a slide deck, kind of take you through what water mixable oils are, a little brief history of oil painting itself, a little bit about how the magic happens. And then the last part, I'm going to do a little demo. Now, this is something you can watch. You don't have to follow along. You can if you want to, but I want to show you some of the features of the paint, especially when you're adding the mediums. That's where I get asked the most questions. And then also a little trick on how you can mix Cobra with traditional oils. So that's super fun as well. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And you'll see my presentation pop up here. I'm going to put that on. There we go. There we go. Everybody should see that home page. So join the Revolution. Catchy marketing, guys, right? I love that. When we're talking about water mixable oils, what we're really talking about is painting solvent-free. This has been a trend that's been going on now for a couple decades on the uptick. People are looking for safer ways to work with their oils, a beloved medium now for many artists, but a lot of artists had to give it up because the solvents that were used, either they didn't have proper ventilation or they had specific health issues. Whatever the reason may be, people are looking for alternatives to solvent in the studio. I get asked primarily these three categories of what folks are motivated by. The first is health. A lot of folks are painting at home, don't have the proper ventilation to be using solvents in their studio space. They don't have a dedicated space, or they have some unique health issues directly related to exposure to solvents. So that's the number one reason folks are looking to paint solvent-free. After that, it's the environment. Solvents like turpentine can be toxic to the environment as well as your health. Disposal of them can be challenging depending on where you live. So environmental concerns are certainly up there as well. And then finally, convenience, especially for you plein air painters out there or traveling. You know what a hassle it is to travel with solvents or to try to find solvents in remote locations. Even for studio artists, the convenience of being able to mix with water and clean up with water is a big advantage. So three of the main things that come up in terms of looking to paint solvent-free. So a little bit about Royal Talons before I jump into the presentation. Royal Talons is the manufacturer of Cobra Water Mixable Oils. Royal Talons was established in 1899. Here's our original building. We're actually on the same piece of real estate in Apeldoorn in the Netherlands. I'm not making that name up. That is the real city. It's about an hour east of Amsterdam by train. And you can literally get off the train and walk to our manufacturing facility. This is a picture of the factory floor in the 1930s. I love this because you can see all those wheels and belts. All of the paint mills were operated by steam power back then, no electricity. And you can't really see it in this picture, but I love these. A lot of the workers are wearing Dutch wooden shoes, super fun. This is a picture from our 1901 catalog for Rembrandt watercolors. Rembrandt was the first product line that was manufactured. We have oils, watercolors, and soft pastels now, and that's our premium line. You're probably familiar with Rembrandt as a brand. We also manufacture Van Gogh, oils, watercolors, pastels. We also are Amsterdam, as well as Cobra and many others underneath the Royal Talons umbrella. You notice on the building, it just said Talons, but today we're Royal Talons, and that's thanks to Queen Wilhelmina, pictured here. She bestowed us the royal predicate in 1949 for our cultural and economic contributions to the Netherlands. It didn't hurt that she was an amateur painter herself, and the summer palace for the Dutch royal family is also located in Apeldoorn. Cobra was introduced in 2010. We actually had another water mixable oil under the Van Gogh brand years before this, but it's all been consolidated now under Cobra. That's our premier water mixable oil in both artist and study grades. Royal Talons North America was established in 2015. We've been offering our products in the US since the 1930s, but always through a third-party distributor. So now we have our own customer service center there to assist artists throughout North America. And then finally, a quick shout out to the Royal Talons Foundation that supports art education globally. An example of one of their most recent contributions were to refugees from the Ukraine and Eastern European countries. We help provide supplies and workshops for their continued art education. So a fun example of some of the work they do. And there's some email addresses for more information if you'd like. I'm your teacher today. I'm a working artist exhibiting now for more than 30 years. I've been in the art materials industry for more than 25 years, worn many hats, figuratively and literally, as you can see, from retail to manufacturing, but primarily education. That's where my real passion is. And then I taught art history and studio art at university for about a decade. And Jeff Olson Art is where you can learn more about me. All right, so today we're going to talk about why Cobra, and what I'm saying there is why the name Cobra. There are no venomous snakes lurking the streets of Amsterdam, so where did that come from? Then I'm going to share with you a very, very brief history of oil paint. We'll jump into what is oil paint, its composition. We'll look at pigments, we'll look at the binder. We will also look at the drying oils as a whole, the binders for oil paints traditionally. Then we'll jump into specifics about water mixable oils. What is an emulsifier? That's a secret ingredient that makes the magic happen. And then I'll share some of the history of emulsifiers in art through time. And then I'm going to finish up with auxiliaries. Those are the mediums, and that's what I'm going to demonstrate for you today. So I'll talk about why those are used and how they can enhance your experience with the paint. And then we're going to dispel some of the myths. There's so much misinformation out there about water mixable oils. So I'm going to share with you some of the truths and then some tips in using them successfully as well. And then I have a fun little thing at the end. There's a brand new movie called the Peasants movie based on a Nobel Prize winning Polish novel. It's been made into a movie by the same folks who made the movie Loving Vincent, completely hand painted in Cobra oil, this one. So that'll be fun to see that. And then of course we'll have a Q&A. We mentioned to go ahead and type your questions in the chat. We aren't going to be answering them until we get through the presentation itself into the demo portion of it. So I'm not ignoring you. Just want to make sure we have time to get through the presentation to the demo. All right, so without further ado, let's jump into why Cobra. Why do we name it Cobra? As you probably noticed when I was going through the different brands, Rembrandt, Van Gogh, Amsterdam, we always give a nod to Dutch culture or history in the naming of our product lines, and Cobra is no exception. Cobra is actually the name of a painting group that emerged after World War II in the cities of Copenhagen, Brussels, and Amsterdam. And that's where the name Cobra comes from, the cities from where these artists were. Karel Appel, who was the Dutchman, he's this dapper guy back here with the mustache and the plaid coat. He is quoted as saying, "We do not want to be understood, we want to be freed." And what he was talking about was being freed from the traditional academic rigor of oil painting historically. They were embracing what they called primitive art, what we would call outsider art today. They were influenced by automatism as part of the Surrealist movement, very much like the abstract expressionists, almost at the same exact time period in New York City. Cobra artists had a lot in similar with them in terms of their philosophy of art making. All right, oil painting, super brief history. So a lot of folks think of oil painting as beginning in the European tradition during the Renaissance, and that's certainly when a lot of the innovations took place. But actually the oldest known oil painting dates back to the 7th century and was discovered in the Bamiyan region of Afghanistan. Here you can see the side of a mountain that the Taliban in 2001 blew up. There were some monumental sculptures of Buddha on the mountainside. If there was a silver lining at all to this horrible event, it was the discovery of a series of caves behind the sculptures that had murals depicting the life cycle of Buddha. When they started evaluating these murals, not only were they able to date them back to the 7th century, they discovered that they were made with oil paint. It was a combination of walnut oil and poppy seed oil, two binders that are still used today in making oil paint, and pigment. And you had these beautiful, well-executed murals throughout the caves, floor to ceiling, really quite incredible. We're not sure whether the artists brought these traditions of oil painting with them from Asia. It very well could be that they just made use of the materials that they found in the Bamiyan region. It was a crossroads at this time for the Silk Road. So they could have just been using the materials that were available. Walnuts and poppy seed especially were very prevalent in that part of Afghanistan at that time. So we're not sure, but the execution leads us to believe that there were probably earlier examples, even older than this, that we just haven't discovered yet. When we get to Europe in the 15th century, that's where we see the birth of oil painting as we know it today. Artists like Van Eyck, we think this is a self-portrait of him. In the back is his famous Ghent altarpiece, one of the more infamous paintings in art history. Van Eyck is credited with inventing a lot of the techniques in making his oil paints as well as painting with them. Really revolutionized it. Oils were known in art making in Europe as early as the 12th century. It was used often in combination with tempera paint. But it was really with Van Eyck and other artists in the north, like Van der Weyden, where we see the development of the medium that we're familiar with today. And there are a few things he did that were unique that have carried over. The first is the polymerization of the oil. So he didn't just use the oil freshly pressed. He actually cooked it up. And heating it changed the consistency and made it possible to create those wonderful glazing techniques that you see that the old masters still use throughout this period, all the way up into the 20th century today. Also, the introduction of turpentine into the process. Turpentine was not widely known to painters at this time. And Van Eyck showed how it could be used as a solvent to create leaner layers for the underpainting, as well as cleaning up in the studio. Next, he added resins to the paint. So he took that polymerized oil and he added resins. This is a picture showing the making of pine resin. Again, helps change the consistency and working property of the paint, all lending for Van Eyck towards the glazing technique. And then finally, secatives. Secatives are a type of metal salt, a lead salt, that he added into the paint that made it oxidize faster. So that made it dry more quickly and enabled him to build up more layers more rapidly. So all these things were innovations by Van Eyck and his contemporaries that helped revolutionize the oil technique. At the time, the most prevalent or prominent mediums were fresco, pictured on the left, and tempera, which is egg yolk with pigment mixed into it. Both of these are beautiful mediums, but they have some limitations in their color, their tonal range. They dry very quickly, so you really have to have it planned out what you're going to do. You can't really blend colors. So they're beautiful, but limited in terms of what you could do with them. Oil paint offered artists a whole new range of activities. So here's a tempera painting from the 12th century, The Descent from the Cross. And then here is Van der Weyden's 15th century Descent from the Cross. And you can see the heightened amount of realism that was able to be achieved because of the oil medium itself. It stayed open longer, which allowed colors to be blended to create this realistic effects of fabrics and textures like the skin. It also had a much broader tonal range, more intense color. So the features of it really lent to the goals of the artists of that period. Van Eyck called it the beauty of earthly things. They were really interested in representing the world as we saw it in relationship to the humanist ideas that were being shared during the Renaissance itself. So what is oil paint? Oil paint is the combination of a couple basic ingredients. We have the primary ingredients of the coloring agent, and artist paints are made with pigments. Dyes are another type of coloring agent, but they're not light fast, so we prefer pigments in making professional materials. And then the binder, and in the case of oils, it's a drying oil. So these are the two main ingredients in any paint, a coloring agent and a binder. In oil paint specifically, there can be some other ingredients that are added. Extenders or fillers can be added. Student grade paints often contain fillers. This is calcium carbonate in the picture. So it replaces some of the pigment to make the paint more affordable or more reasonably priced. Often even professional grade paints will include these ingredients as something to beef up the paint, make it a little thicker, a little denser. Some pigments, not all pigments are created equal. Some behave in the drying oil, some not. And so other things are needed to enhance that. Stabilizers, another example. This is aluminum stearate, is often added in very small amounts, less than 1% sometimes. Like I was saying, some pigments don't behave, they don't want to settle down. So the stabilizer is added to help them perform better within the painting mixture. Solvents can sometimes be used. Some pigments become very dense when mixed with the oil, so it loosens them up a little bit. And then finally, resins, or not finally, but resins can also be added just like Van Eyck did. We still add resins to paint today for a variety of reasons. Sometimes resins are added to speed up the drying time, just like with secatives. Again, something that dates back to Van Eyck. Adding secatives into the paint helps it to dry. And sometimes this is done in regular oils, not just in quick dry mediums. because again, some pigments behave differently and dry at different rates. So this helps to even those out so you have consistency across the line. All right, so let's talk about pigments, the coloring agents themselves. I love this picture. These are how the pigments arrive to us at the factory, and this picture doesn't do it justice, especially that yellow. When you're there in person, it's like there's a light inside the bag and it just glows. It's really incredible to see. We categorize pigments based on their origin. So pigments can be organic, meaning coming from either plants or animals. They can be inorganic, which means mineral-based, or they can be synthetic. Synthetic pigments begin as organic or inorganic pigments and then are synthesized, essentially cooked up to enhance their working properties, to make a more affordable alternative, to make them more permanent, a lot of different reasons for synthesizing. And let's take a look at a couple of these. First, an organic example. I don't know if you recognize that little beetle. That's the cochineal beetle, indigenous to Central and South America. They breed on the underside of prickly pear cactus, and all the way back to the 4th century, the Aztecs were harvesting these bugs for their color. These guys would sacrifice themselves for the color carmine. The Aztecs made great use of it, not only as a dye or pigment, but also in the coloring of masonry. When the Spanish invaded, they discovered it and took it back to the Europeans. And we see in the 17th and 18th centuries, carmine being all the rage, this wonderful example of the Rubens painting in the background. Today, we have a synthetic version. The bugs are no longer sacrificing their life for the color carmine, but carmine is still a regular ingredient used in food coloring and in lipstick. It's one of the primary reds that you see in lipsticks today. Next, we have an inorganic pigment, one of the more infamous. Inorganic pigments are the oldest pigments. These are the mineral-based pigments. The caves in Lascaux, the Aboriginal paintings in Australia are done with oxides, iron oxide usually, so literally the rocks beneath our feet. This is one of the more infamous. These rocks contain lapis lazuli. Lapis is a semi-precious stone. It's worth the same as gold by weight, and it's been known as a pigment for centuries. It's mined almost exclusively in the mountains of Afghanistan, and we see here a picture from the quarry. In the Renaissance, it was a highly valued pigment. The Venetians gave it its name as we know it today, and that's ultramarine, ultramarine blue. In Italian, it's translated as from over the sea or beyond the sea. So it spoke to the journey that it took to get into the studios of artists. It was very expensive then, just like it is today. So if you were using this pigment, you were a pretty successful painter or you had a pretty wealthy patron. The Catholic Church actually had dictates on how it could be used in the early Renaissance. It was almost exclusively seen in images of Christ or the robe of the Madonna, as we see pictured here. So super famous and wonderful pigment. Today, we, although are using synthetic versions of ultramarine, much less expensive. But there are a few companies that are still making true lapis. Synthetic pigments, most of what we use today are synthesized. That's typically, as with the ultramarine, to find a less expensive alternative to a rare mineral. It can often be to improve the working properties, improve the light fastness. A lot of organic pigments fade rather quickly, and so we're looking for light, fast alternatives. But it isn't just a modern invention. Synthetic pigments have been around since the earliest of artists working with materials. This yellow is Naples yellow, one of the oldest synthetic pigments. Dates all the way back to ancient Babylon. It was used by the Egyptians to color glass. In the 18th century, this pigment was very popular with landscape painters, as we see in this image by Turner. Naples yellow has this wonderful ability to kind of go back into the background or sit into the background where a lot of yellows tend to pop. So it was really prized for landscape painting for that reason. It's made by synthesizing lead and antimony, fairly toxic version. Today we have hues of Naples rather than using true Naples in most paint lines because of the toxicity of the original pigment. It's called Naples because of the sulfur deposits around the volcano in southern Italy, and this color is very prevalent in the masonry that you find in Naples. If you've ever traveled there, you're probably familiar with it. But it really has nothing to do with Naples. It was invented many centuries before then. Wonderful example of synthetic pigment. All right, so let's jump over to binder. So those are a little bit about the coloring agents. So now the binder. So what is a binder? A binder is what gives any paint its primary working properties. So pigments are universal. Pigments are the same in acrylics, oils, watercolors, for example. It's the binders that make each one of those paints unique. For acrylics, an acrylic polymer resin. For watercolor, gum arabic, and for oil paint, usually a drying oil, most often linseed oil. When you look at the dictionary definition, I will get it out, of a binder, you will find this definition: liquid substances that harden through a chemical or physical process. That's true for most paint binders, although there are some exceptions. Gum arabic, for example, does not create a tangible paint film. It's absorbed into the paper, and it's one of the reasons you can lift the color even after it's dry. But traditional oil binders typically do harden and create a durable paint film. Primary functions of all binders, though, are suspension and adhesion. So what I mean by suspension is pigments are like sand. If you put them in water and stir them up, they'll disperse, but eventually they'll sink back down to the bottom. So a good binder for paint needs to suspend and hold those pigments in place once it's been stirred. The other part is adhesion. You're painting on a surface. It needs to stick. So it needs to have good adhesive qualities or properties. So these are two things that are super important for any paint binder: suspension and adhesion. So what are the binders for oil paints? It's a group of oils, vegetable oils, that we refer to as the drying oils. That means that they dry to a hard, strong, durable film through a process known as oxidation. That means they're absorbing oxygen from the atmosphere. It's a very slow chemical process. That's why the paint takes so long to dry. Compared to acrylics, for example, which dry through evaporation, which is a very rapid chemical process. Drying oils are unique in vegetable oils. Not all vegetable oils are drying oils. For example, olive oil, you could mix pigment into it, you could paint with it, but it would never dry. Drying oils all have to be able to dry to that hard paint film to be successful as a binder for oil paint. The most common and well-known is linseed oil. So they're the seeds of the flax plant. They are pressed, and that oil is used as the binder in many forms. You can find it in stand oil. You can find it in bleached, refined, lots of different names, but essentially it's all the same thing, just processed differently, all coming from the flax plant. It's used most often because it creates the most durable paint film of all the drying oils. It dries relatively fast compared to the others. I know that sounds kind of weird since it takes so long to dry, but compared to other drying oils, it's the fastest. If there's a downside to linseed oil, it's that it can yellow, and you will notice that in lighter colors, especially if you're adding a lot of additional oil through the use of mediums. So that's one thing to be on the watch for. But other than that, it's the most common and the best binder for creating oil paint today. A lot of folks ask me, why don't we call it flaxseed oil? Lin is actually the Old English, Old Norse for flax. So linseed is flaxseed by name. Next, I have safflower oil. It's a common binder used in making oils today. It's often added to linseed oil in the manufacture of whites to mitigate the yellowing effect of linseed oil. It's a slower drying oil. It also doesn't create as hard of a paint film, so it's not often used as a binder all by itself, usually in combination with other oils. Walnut oil is an excellent binder. I mentioned its use all the way back to the 7th century in the caves in the Bamiyan region in Afghanistan. It was also favored by many Renaissance painters. It's a very expensive drying oil, but it has excellent qualities, very durable paint film, very similar to linseed oil. Not yellowing though, like linseed oil, so it has that advantages. A lot of artists use walnut oil as a solvent itself today, which is another way to paint solvent-free. One downside to walnut oil, though, if you're not watching it carefully in your studio, it can rot in the bottle. Once it's on the surface of your painting, it's fine, but in the bottle, if it's not sealed up, and a lot of artists will actually refrigerate it, you'll know if it goes bad in your studio because it'll smell like something died in the corner. So that's one downside that you have to be aware of when using walnut oil. And finally, poppy seed oil. Again, I mentioned its use in those caves in Afghanistan. It's a lighter, non-yellowing oil, very slow drying, doesn't create a super durable paint film, but it is used a lot by artists today as a medium, and it's used a lot in the making of varnishes as well. So these are 4 drying oils that you will come into contact with a lot still today as an oil painter. So water mixable oils, this is where we make our leap into water mixable oils. They're often referred to as water miscible. That's just a technical way of saying water mixable. Water soluble, artists will say, technically, chemically, that's not true, but it is something that's come to be used in describing these oils. They are a revolutionary paint in terms of they have all the characteristics of a traditional oil, but without the need for harmful solvents. Water mixable oils are genuine oil paints formulated with a drying oil. Cobra uses linseed oil. A lot of folks think, oh, well, you know, they can't be a true oil paint because I can mix them with water, and that's just not true. We saw how Van Eyck revolutionized oils by polymerizing it and adding other ingredients, and it doesn't change the fact that it's a true oil paint. Unlike traditional oil paint, the binder has been modified so that it can be mixed with water, and it's modified using an emulsifier. It's something called a surfactant that acts as an emulsifier in the paint, and that's what allows the oil to bond with the water and form a stable suspension. So what does that look like? First, what is an emulsifier? Maybe you're familiar with this term, maybe you're not. Emulsifiers or emulsifying agents are compounds that stabilize or prevent liquids that ordinarily don't mix from separating. So this is very common in the manufacture of canned and bottled foods. There's usually an emulsifier that's added to keep the ingredients from separating. Many plants and animals, including human beings, have emulsifiers in their body to keep the water and the fat from separating. So it's very common in nature and also in the manufacture of products like food products. If you were to look at a microscope at the emulsifier in action, you would see this. So we see our little fat or oil molecule floating in the water there, and the molecule, the emulsifier, has one end that's hydrophilic, we call that water loving, and the other, which is lipophilic or fat or oil loving, and it attaches itself to the fat molecule and bonds with the water. So this is how that magic happens. So that additional emulsifier, very small amount, sometimes it's as little as 2%, is added to the oil to allow for this magic mixture to happen. So there is a long history for this. This is something that wasn't just pulled out of a hat. It isn't something that's brand new that hasn't been tried or tested. It actually originates back to the very origins of oil painting itself. I mentioned tempera. Tempera painting, very popular, early Renaissance Gothic painting, where you take the egg yolk, mix it with pigment, and use water as a vehicle. And the reason you can use water as a vehicle with this animal protein is because the egg has a naturally occurring emulsifier in it that allows that to take place. So that's one example of an emulsifier in art. Another very ancient example is casein paint. Egyptians used casein paint. It's a milk protein or a milk fat that's used as the binder. And then water, again, is used as the vehicle, and that's possible because that same emulsifier exists naturally within the milk. Matter of fact, the word emulsifier, emulsion, the Latin root for it means to milk, and that's because of this emulsifier occurring in milk. Milk is an emulsion. Finally, a contemporary example are soybeans. Soybeans contain that same naturally occurring emulsifier called lecithin. If you're eating a granola bar today and look at the ingredients, you'll see soy lecithin. It's a very common ingredient in food used as an emulsifier for food products, but it's also used in the manufacture of paint materials. Many of you might be familiar with alkyd mediums. Alkyd mediums synthesize soy oil with alcohol and acid to create those fast drying mediums. It is a drying oil itself, although it doesn't create a very hard paint film. But it is something that you could use to paint with soy oil. So long, long history. And I stumbled across something a couple of years ago. I've had this book, The Painter's Question and Answer book by Frederick Tubbs, bought it at a garage sale like 20 some years ago, and was paging through it for a totally another reason. If you're not familiar with Frederick Tubbs, he was a very famous American painter in New York in the 20s and 30s. He taught at the Art Students League. He wrote this book in partnership with some other artists like Thomas Hart Benton, kind of a how-to book for oil painters. In the back of it, he talks about the oil tempera painting technique, and he shares a formula for creating your own water mixable oils. By mixing egg yolk with stand oil, he creates a binder that you can add pigment to and paint with and use water as your vehicle. So not only is there history all the way back to the origins of oil painting, there's a contemporary reference here and oil painters creating their own water mixable oil paint way before they were manufactured and marketed that way. All right, so let's jump into the auxiliaries, which I'm going to be demoing today, some of them for you. What are auxiliaries? So these are the mediums. Mediums are very popular in traditional oil painting, and there are some mediums that are made specifically for the water mixable oils. Mediums in general will adapt the consistency so they can make the paint thinner or thicker. They can make the paint more transparent. They can speed up the drying time. And they can change the finish of your painting. So a lot of different reasons to use them. You can mix them directly into the paint on your palette, or you can dip your brush as you go. One of my tips is always use moderation. That's the key to success, especially if it's brand new. We have a painting medium, which I'm going to demonstrate today. Many traditional oil painters will make their own medium, a mixture of linseed oil and solvent. So this is equivalent to that. It's great for thinning your paint, making it easier to brush on the surface. It will make the paint a little more transparent. Does not alter the drying time, but it will make the paint a little glossier. The glazing medium is very specific to that technique. It's almost the consistency of honey, so it makes the brush strokes completely level out after you put them on there. And it's meant for that technique of building many transparent layers of color. The quick dry medium does everything that the painting medium does, but it also has an added secretive that makes the paint oxidize more quickly or dry more quickly, sometimes twice as fast as without it, depending on how much you're using. And then finally, the painting paste, one of my favorites, essentially paint without the pigment. It squeezes out the tube, and you'll see it. I'll demonstrate it in a minute. And you can add that to bulken up the paint, to extend the paint, and it doesn't change the sheen. All these others make the paint glossier. The painting paste gives it the same sheen that the paint has out of the tube. So a great way to extend your paint, and really wonderful for artists who love impasto techniques like palette knife techniques. I did include a note here on the varnishes. There are some Cobra varnishes, but Cobra varnishes and all varnishes can be used on Cobra or any water mixable oil paint film after it's dried 6 to 9 months. These varnishes do contain solvents, though. Just a note there, if you're using this, to stay away from solvents. The reason varnishes have solvents on them is because at some point they need to be able to be removed without damaging the underlying paint film. To do so, they have to have that solvent as an ingredient. So just beware if you're painting solvent-free, because you have zero tolerance for solvents. All varnishes have some solvents in them. New this year, some super fun new mediums. We have the brush cleaner. You can use soap and water. Dish soap works really great. But this brush cleaner adds a conditioner that's really great if you're using natural fiber brushes. So natural fiber brushes, usually you don't use when you're using water, but this brush will extend the life of, or this medium will extend the life of your brush with the water mixable oils. We also have a water mixable safflower oil and linseed oil, so you can make your own mediums by mixing these with water, or you can also use them as a binder to make your own paint. Just add dry pigment. We have a Cobra medium mix, and if I have time, I'll show you how this works today. The medium mix you can add to any traditional oil paint in a 1-to-1 ratio and make it water mixable. So you may have an investment already of traditional oils, but are thinking about switching. With this medium, you can make all your paints water mixable paints. And then finally, we have a Cobra solvent-free paint thinner. So an alternative to using water, more like adding a thinner to your paint and how it behaves. Great for creating those lean layers underneath. It also makes the paint dry a little more quickly. So a nice alternative to water for folks who like those type of techniques. All right, what are some of the myths out there? And there's a bunch of them. So I'm going to go through a few of the most commonly held myths about water miscible oils. The first is that they contain water. I hear this all the time. Those water-based paints, there's no water in these paints, only what you add to them as you're painting. And you don't even need to add water. You can paint with them without water if you wanted to. So that's a myth. There's no water in the paint. That they're not a true oil paint, that somehow they're a different concoction, and that is false. They are a true oil paint. They're a linseed oil binder with a high level of pigment. And just as we saw with Van Eyck and other painters throughout history, the addition of an emulsifier does not change that in any way, shape, or form. That they dry faster than traditional oils. That's also false. These have the same working properties as any other oil you're used to. Water actually evaporates more slowly than solvents like turpentine do from the paint. So in those early stages, especially if you're adding a lot of water, you may see that it actually takes longer to dry. I think this mistake is made because people are associating it then with acrylics, and acrylics evaporate and dry much more quickly. But these are a true oil paint. So you're not going to see any faster drying time with them than you would your normal oil paints. They cannot be mixed with traditional oils. That's false. You can mix them with any traditional oil out there. You could use them with solvents if you wanted to. There's no reason that you couldn't do that. The question is, would you want to? And also, I'm going to give you a little tip and show you how you can mix them directly with traditional oils and maintain their water miscibility. A lot of people think they work like acrylics, and like I said before, that's false. They do not work anything like acrylics. So if you're thinking of using these to replace your acrylics, they won't do that. They're going to have the working properties of an oil paint. They can be mixed with acrylics. There are some manufacturers out there who say this is okay. We do not recommend it. As I mentioned, oils dry through oxidation, very slow process. Acrylics dry through evaporation, very rapid process. You could mix them on your palette, you could mix them on the surface you're painting, but we're not sure what the interaction will be down the road on how that might compromise the paint film. So we don't recommend it as a manufacturer. That they're not archival, which means they don't stand the test of time, and that's false. Matter of fact, I would say that these paints have been tested more vigorously than any other oil paint in history, certainly more than what Van Eyck did in his studio. These paints are archival paints. The pigments are light fast, and the artist grade excellent light fastness across almost the entire line. So they're a true archival paint. That they have less pigment, that somehow the addition of the emulsifier affects how much color is there, and that is false. The artist grade Cobra has as much pigment as our Rembrandt oil paints, for example. So lots of color in these. You're really going to enjoy the samples that you got. A few tips. I mentioned this already, but when using mediums, moderation. I'd use very little in the beginning until you get used to it. You can use as much as you want once you get going, but in the beginning, just try small amounts till you get a feel on how it changes the working property of the paint. You can combine, as I said, Cobra oils with traditional oils. And if you maintain a 4-to-1 ratio, 4 parts Cobra, 1 part traditional oil, it will retain its water miscibility. I actually can do this 2-to-1, but there are a couple colors that are exceptions to this. And that's why we give the 4-to-1 ratio. I'm going to show you 2-to-1 in the demo. With water, when you're adding water, you don't want to exceed a 1-to-1 ratio of water with paint. This is the same recommendation that a lot of manufacturers of traditional oils make with adding solvents. The more water, the more solvent you add to your paint, reduces the integrity of the paint film as it dries. So you want to avoid that. There are some hacks to this if you really like that really wet fluid layer. One, you can use the thinner for that now, or you could mix painting medium with water in a 1-to-1 ratio, which creates a really fluid medium, and then add small amounts of paint to that, and you can get that really wonderful wash-like look with your paint and still know that the paint film is going to have a lot of integrity. All right, just a fun note on the new film, The Peasants. This is a movie that came out last year. It's streaming now on most services. The Peasants is based on a Polish novel, Nobel Prize winning novel, made by the same artist who made same company that made Loving Vincent. It's 100% hand painted animation, all with Cobra oil paint. There were more than 70 artists working. They worked in 4 separate studios in Poland and Ukraine until war broke out, and then they all moved to Poland. About 200,000 combined hours of painting went into this film. Really incredible. They used 1,300 liters of Cobra oil paint. Can you imagine that? Just incredible amounts of paint. It premiered at the Toronto Film Festival to much acclaim, and we're hoping, like Loving Vincent, that they'll be nominated for an Academy Award for animation feature as well. You can learn more about it at thepeasantsmovie.com. I've got a few fun pictures. See the artists working in the studio, and then a couple details of those cubicles. One of the reasons they switched to Cobra, in Loving Vincent, they used our Van Gogh oil paint. They switched to Cobra because with the Van Gogh paint, you needed solvents, and they ended up having to separate all their artists into multiple studio locations to deal with the solvents. So being solvent-free meant they could be in one location and everybody could work together, as you saw in that picture. Here's a detail of one of the frames. So the movie was first filmed with live actors, and then frame by frame, the artists reproduced the images in these wonderful paintings. This kind of gives you a sense of the scale of work that went into this movie, all these wonderful paintings that resulted from it. And the word on the street is that these are going to be put into a traveling exhibition. I don't know if it'll come to the US or not, but super fun to see that. Those are the true producers of the movie, same ones who produced Loving Vincent. And hopefully this is going to work. Here we go. I got a little clip of the movie to share with you.
Jak na Dominikową? Ludziska, letą blejno pleść. Ożenić się trzeba. Takiego męża dostaniesz, taką gospodarkę.
Podoba mi się, to się i ożeni. Zabronisz?
Już przychodzi, nie odchodzi. Ziemia zostaje.
Isn't that fun? There we go. One last announcement before we get to the demo. There were 70 colors in the Cobra Artist line, 30 new ones added this year. So now 100 colors to choose from. So a true professional artist line of oil paint. And then for more information, you can go online, use that QR code or the address listed below. We have an online magazine, tell you everything you wanted to know about Cobra, some artist testimonials, and I even have an article in there too, talking about some of the things that I shared with you today. All right, now the demo. So I'm going to escape here. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. There we go. All right, so do you want to do a couple questions before I jump into the demo, or you want me to just jump in the demo?
I did get a couple questions.
Sure.
So Maddie asks, where are the paints made? I'll be in Europe in a couple of months, and I wonder if one can have a tour.
Absolutely. So Apeldoorn is about an hour east of Amsterdam. So if you're in Amsterdam, you just go to the central train station, and it's about 2 stops. It takes about an hour to get there, and then you can walk to the facility. We have something called the Experience Center, which is open to the public. You can go in and they have every product that we manufacture. You can literally take it off the shelf, and there are people there to answer questions. They also give tours of the facility. With small groups of like 1 or 2, you really don't need to book it ahead. For large groups, you want to get in touch with them and they can schedule it. And they usually set up a nice lunch and stuff like that. So it is something that you can go see that the public has access to.
Great. Ken asks, can the Cobra auxiliaries be used in conjunction with any brand of water mixable oils?
Yes, they are universal in that regard. So you can use them with other brands. And you know, that's not uncommon. In our studio, we have more than one brand typically. There are very few people that are 100% brand loyal. And because of that, all these paints and mediums are formulated with that in mind.
All right. Linda asks, how do you clean brushes?
So soap and water, dish soap. Dawn comes up a lot in conversation. Dawn dish soap and water cleans these brushes really well. I'm going to show you how just rinsing with water gets most of the paint out. The brush cleaner that we offer now has that additional conditioner, which is really great if you're using traditional bristle brushes, for example. The best brushes, and maybe this is a question that's out there I'll ask too, are usually synthetic or synthetic blends are what folks recommend. The same types of brushes they recommend for acrylics, and that's because of the water, right? Water can damage natural fibers like bristle brushes, which are hog hair, or sable brushes. So synthetics are usually recommended. You can use all those traditional hair brushes with Cobra and water. Just make sure you're taking them out of the water. Don't let your brushes sit in water overnight. And with this new brush cleaner, it will help condition them as well.
Great. That's all the questions so far.
All right, perfect. Let me go ahead and I will switch the camera. You should be able to see. There we go. Here's my table. All right, so we're going to go through a few things. The first thing I wanted to share with you, I mentioned, is that you can mix these paints with oils. So I've got traditional Rembrandt and some Cobra. I'm going to move these other things to the side for now. And you can see that there. So here's our traditional oil paint. And I'm going to squeeze a little bit out over here. This is super fun color. This is the transparent oxide red. This is the most popular color in North America for Rembrandt. Just an anecdote there. Super popular with a lot of artists. So there's our traditional oil paint. I'm going to take my brush. I've got my bucket of water over here. And I'm going to get a little water on that. And I'm going to try to mix it with the traditional oil paint. And I don't know if you can see this. I'm spreading the oil paint around, but the water is not mixing. I'm going to go ahead and tip it up, and you'll see how that water dripped down the surface right there. There's no mixing with the paint. The difference then, when we mix water with Cobra, same color there. Getting water on my brush again. Now I'm going to mix it with the Cobra. And you can see how the paint reacts and thins out right away. So total different reaction with the two. The water thins it out and gives us that nice color. Now you can mix these two together. I mentioned 4-to-1, but I use 2-to-1 most often. So if I put down a little bead of the oil paint there, that's the traditional Rembrandt. Now I'm using the Cobra next. And I'll put twice as much Cobra as Rembrandt. It's not scientific, I'm just eyeballing it there. I'm going to get my palette knife and I'll mix the two together. So let's say you've got a bunch of Rembrandt or another traditional brand of oil paint, but you want to switch over to the water mixables. You don't have to get rid of that. You can actually integrate it. Or maybe there's a color in one line that isn't available in the water mixable. You can mix the two together and be able to work with it. So there's our mixture. Get my brush with water again. Here's the moment of truth, and there we go. It mixes just fine, just like we see above. Ta-da, magic. I'll hold that up a little closer so you can see it a little better. See the difference, the original oil, the water just dripped right off. But here with the Cobra mixing, and here our mixture of Rembrandt traditional oil with Cobra, and we're able to mix and paint with water. That's, I mean, for me, that was really a game changer. And I think for a lot of artists, that really meant a lot to be able to use that in combination with whatever paints they may have. So the next thing I'm going to do is show you some of the differences in working with the mediums. I'm going to put out a couple beads of paint at the top here. There we go. So there's our Cobra. And this first one right here, I'm just going to put a W here. We're just going to add water for this one. So I'm getting some water. I've got my bucket over here of water. So convenient, right? No solvents. You would never be able to fill up a gallon bucket of solvent next to your painting table, right? All right, so I just want to show you how the paint mixes, kind of like over here, and we're going to mix it all together. One tip I would give you is don't try to go in and just stir it all up. Kind of tease the paint out so that emulsion has, the chemical reaction has a chance to take place. Kind of see how I'm slowly working the paint into the water, creating a leaner layer. Leaner means reduced fat content. For those of you who paint fat over lean. So there's the paint mixed with water. Extended it a little bit. And then I'll show you how it pulls down. And it starts to leave the brush towards the bottom. So that's just water with the paint. Give you a sense of the texture, You can see the brush strokes there are still evident. Just the paint with a little bit of water. This next one, I'm going to use the painting medium. I'm going to put PM up here. Wash my brush out. So here's the painting medium right here. I'll hold it a little bit closer. 091 for reference. It's the painting medium. And I'm going to add that directly onto my paint. About a 1-to-1 ratio. You can kind of see it has that amber color there. And the same thing here. You could use a palette knife with this. You can use your brush. I'll clean my brush off from the last one and just slowly work the paint into the medium. You can see how it's very pigment hungry. It doesn't take long for the pigment to disperse into the medium. You can see, unlike when I had the water, there's no tinting. That kind of white effect that you saw when I first added the water, that's the emulsion taking place. That quickly goes away. But here you don't see that at all. You can see that the paint is getting a little more transparent. And you probably can tell, yeah, looking at the camera, you can tell a little bit that it's also a little shinier, a little glossier. So I'm going to get that mixed in there thoroughly. All right, now we're going to take this and work our way down. So you can see a little difference in how the paint looks, right? So we've got the distinct brush strokes here, but where I've added the medium, those brush strokes level out a little bit. You can also see the difference in gloss by adding the medium to it. You can see how the paint kind of pooled on the edges. You don't get that here with the paint all by itself with the water. So the painting medium really does change the viscosity of the paint. It makes it flow a little more easier on the canvas. A nice feel is how I would describe it. And for oil painters out there, that's probably something that resonates with you, but it really feels good, easier to cover a lot of area, but really kind of enhances the experience of painting with the paint. Looks a little richer in its color, kind of glows a little more, right? So that's the painting medium. Next, I'm going to do the painting paste. So what I mean about the paint without the, let's see how close I can get it there. Kind of that amber color, right? Paint without the pigment. Let me put paste up here. I'm going to use my palette knife for mixing these together. You can see almost immediately it absorbs the pigment. And essentially I've given myself now, I took that one bead of paint, I added the paste, which is a lot less expensive than the paint, and I've doubled the volume of paint I have. So that's one of the primary benefits in using the paint is it extends it. It will make the paint a little more transparent. I think it makes the paint a little buttery, more buttery. And I like that in terms of the way it feels when I paint with it. I could just use the palette knife there too, but I'm going to show you with the brush so we can compare apples to apples here. So you can see it still has that nice thick consistency that the paint did out of the tube. You know, work that down. You can see one of the things I like about it, I've extended the amount of paint and look how farther I was able to brush before it started to run out. So it helps you extend the paint. It's not that much more transparent, right? And that's at a 1-to-1 amount. If I compare it to there, and I compare it to there, it gets some of that same glow, but without the high gloss. You can see how high glossy that is. That's a little shiny because they're wet paint, but you don't have that same gloss effect. You still get the nice brush strokes. See all the brush strokes there where these are leveled out for the most part. Nice texture. If I go back in with the palette knife, you can see where you can get some wonderful palette knife techniques. Go in here, different viscosities, different levels of paint. So real fun feature of that medium. So here we have the paint with just a little water on the brush. Paint with the painting medium loosens it up, makes the paint level out a little bit, increases the gloss and transparency. Painting paste extends the paint without increasing the gloss, increases the transparency, but maintains the nice body that you get with the paint out of the tube.
So Jeff, we have a few other questions.
Shoot, let's go.
Judith is asking, in fat over lean techniques, how does the medium rank?
In fat over lean, so you want to use the same philosophy you would with any traditional oil with fat over lean. Adding any medium to a paint that contains linseed oil, and all of these do, makes the paint fatter. So this would be the leanest one here. So I had the paint out of the tube and I added water to it. I created a leaner paint. Both of these, I added more linseed oil through the use of the medium. So these are fatter paints. So if you were to create a scale of paint, you would go paint mixed with water, paint out of the tube all by itself, and then paint with a medium. That's lean to fat.
Okay.
But yeah, any technique that you're using fat over lean with traditional oils, the same rules would apply with water mixable oil paint.
Great. Can you mix oils with traditional painting mediums?
Yes, you can, but you will mitigate their water miscibility. So let's say you're a big fan of Galkyd, which is a real popular medium out there. It's a type of alkyd medium that makes the paint dry faster. A lot of people use it for glazing techniques. You can add that to Cobra, but when you do, you're going to mitigate its water miscibility, which means you might not be able to mix it with water or clean with water anymore. But you certainly can do that. You essentially turn the paint into a traditional oil paint when you add those other mediums to them. But they work great with them. Yeah.
Okay. And Maddie is asking, this is more of a general question. Does the brand of canvas make a difference? If yes, what would you recommend?
So surfaces always make a difference with oil paint, probably more so than acrylics for sure. Watercolors surfaces matter a lot. Oil paint matter a lot. Matter of fact, I field a lot of questions from artists, and most of the problems I hear, whether it's traditional or water mixable oils, are the result of a poorly prepared ground. So your ground preparation, the ground you work on, is very important. For water mixable oils, the best ground to use is a universal or acrylic primed surface. That's 90% of the pre-stretched, pre-primed canvases out there. The ones you want to stay away from are oil primed canvases. And the reason for this is the use or the addition of water. If you add water to the Cobra while you're painting on an oil primed surface, it's going to affect the adhesion of the paint to the surface, and it's also going to make the drying time seem to go on forever. If you were just using the paint out of the tube and not using any water, it would probably be okay. But as a recommendation, I would say stay away from oil primed canvases. They usually will say boldly on them that they're oil primed, and they make up a small percentage. The bulk of the canvases out there are acrylic primed or what we call universal priming, and those are the ones you want to use with water mixable oils. 3 coats if you're doing it yourself. So if you've got an acrylic gesso at home and you're priming your own surfaces, be it a panel, canvas, or paper, you want to put 3 good coats on to protect it from the oil. And that's true for traditional oils as well.
Okay. We got a couple more.
Yeah, shoot.
Linda is asking, can you use the paint right out of the tube, or do you have to always mix something in?
I'm going to switch my camera so you can see my mug. So do you have to mix with water? No, you could use it straight out of the tube. Don't have to use water in the process at all. You could use it with the mediums, with no water, and just use water and soap to clean up. You don't have to add water in the painting process.
Okay. Ellen is asking, how is using water-based oils with water or your medium safer or different from using regular oils with linseed oil as your medium?
So the linseed oil medium is completely safe in either scenario. Most of the water mixable oils are linseed oil based. So that's not the issue. The issue is using a solvent like turpentine, white spirits, or odorless mineral spirits. So traditional oil painters typically use one of those to thin out the paint, make it leaner, and to clean their brushes at the end of their session. Those solvents give off volatile organic compounds that are very harmful. Turpentine is probably the worst, like literally melts your body from the inside out. You can paint with it safely, but you have to have excellent ventilation and you need to use what they call limited surface exposure. So don't put it in a great big can. Use a very small little container. The less surface exposure means the less evaporation of the solvent into the air. So that means you're breathing in less of it. White spirits is only mildly better than turpentine. Odorless mineral spirits is probably the best option if you're going to be using traditional solvents. What they've done is added something to slow down the evaporation. So the same toxins are coming off of it. It's just coming off more slowly, which means you have more time to ventilate the air around you. But the main thing in water mixable oils is you can banish those materials and replace them with water. So the painting process is the same, but instead of going for my turpentine or my mineral spirits, I can go for a can or a jar of water and it will function the same in the process.
Okay, that's all the questions so far.
Good, good. Well, if we got a little more time, I can show you a fun color mixing.
Yes,
You
please.
got it? Okay. So this would apply to traditional oils too, but it's a fun thing I like to do with the primary colors in the Cobra line. So I'm going to remove this, put this aside. So these are the three primaries in the Cobra. Where did I go? There we go. My camera moved there. Oh, there it's seeking. There it's coming back. It's auto search feature. There we go. All right. So these are the primary colors. These were made specially. A lot of professional lines don't have primaries, but we made these especially for the artist line. Primary yellow, primary cyan, and primary magenta. Great group of colors to start with. If you're on a budget, you can just get these three in black and white, or even just white, and create a whole range of colors. Now, mixing secondary colors is usually really easy, right? I mix my magenta and my yellow and I get orange. I mix my yellow and cyan and I get green. I mix these two and I get violet. That's simple enough. But where it can get tricky for folks are mixing what we call the tertiary colors. So tertiary colors, those are kind of the earth tones. I probably can't see that. Here, I'll use my marker. The tertiary colors. So if you look on the color wheel or the color pyramid, tertiary colors are those earth tones in the middle, and they usually are combinations of a secondary color like violet, which I'd mix these together, and then another primary color, and that gives me my earth tone. They can be very complicated to mix without getting mud. So I've got a quick little formula for you to show you how to mix them really easily, and it's called 4, 2, 1. And these are the ratio. And you can use them in any combination like this and come up with a whole, and I don't know why my camera keeps moving on me there. It wants to follow that pen or something. Hopefully it's going to find its way back there. So 4, 2, 1, any of these colors in those combinations will give you really sophisticated tertiary colors. So I'm going to start with the red. And again, you can do this in any color combination. I'm going to put out a bead of paint. This is my 4. And then I'm going to go, I want to make a color that's really similar to that earth color that we had here. Now this is my 2. So that means I have twice as much as I did there. So 4, 2, and this is where the 1 comes in. So this is where we're using combinations of all three primaries in a ratio of 4 to 1 to create a fun tertiary color. So I'm going to get my palette knife here, and I'm going to mix these together. You're going to see it's going to make a really sophisticated, clean tertiary mixture, even though I'm using all three primaries. Usually if you were to mix three primaries together in equal amounts, you'd get what equates to a black. And this is one of the reasons it's hard to make clean tertiary colors, because a lot of folks are mixing from their secondary. So there's my mixture. I'm going to add a little white so you get a better sense for what that color looks like. So that's a real fun tertiary mixture. I'm going to do a different one now. I'm going to start with the yellow, just so you can see how these vary. There's my 4. I'm going to go on the cool side. 2. 1. So this one should be a nice complement to the one above. Oh yeah, look at really nice earth green, almost like a chromium oxide, which is a super expensive pigment. These are colors that people don't think they can make with just having 3 primaries. I'm going to add a little white to that so you can see its tone. Those nice colors. So 4-to-1 ratio using the primaries. 3 primary colors and create a whole wonderful palette of tertiary colors. So you can really create some sophisticated mixtures that are nice and clean. Look at that wonderful red. That's a beautiful red, almost like an alizarin, right? And here we have that really nice green, almost like a viridian green, really is what that one turned out to be. So 3 primary colors, and I could continue on in every combination and end up with an entire palette. We've done this before in some demonstrations of all these wonderful mixtures. Oh, it's following me in my naked knee. Sorry about that. I exposed more than I wanted to. All right, back to the FaceTime before this gets R-rated. Here we go. All right, so I hope you enjoyed that. It's a fun thing, and I would encourage you to try it at home. I use the primary color, so I get some nice consistencies across the line. But if you've got ultramarine blue and cad red light and a lemon yellow or something, you're going to get different results. But the 3 colors will mix tertiary palettes based on those hues that can be a lot of fun. So it's something you can use with other colors, not just these 3 primaries.
Great, awesome. This was really educational, even for me. I really enjoyed it, Jeff. Thank you so much for this class on Cobra. We hope you all enjoyed this and learned a lot and are excited to experiment with this water mixable oil paint, and hope to see you all on the next one. Thanks. Have a great
Absolutely, and
rest
good
of your
luck with the
day.
prize. Oh, good luck
Yes.
winning those sets. It's a great prize.
Yes, definitely. Thanks, everyone. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Take care.
everybody.